All right, ready to dive deep into nudges. I bet you know the basics, right? Subtle changes, how choices are presented. They kind of influence what we do, but without taking away our freedom to choose.
Exactly. And today we're going beyond those basics. We're exploring how the field has evolved, some really fascinating applications, and all based on excerpts from the Korean translation of Nudge.
Nudge. That book, it was over a decade ago by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. It really put nudging on the map, didn't it? And wow, the field's grown so much since then.
It really has. I mean, governments, organizations worldwide, they've embraced the idea. They even set up these nudge units, applying behavioral insights to pretty much everything, from policy making to marketing, you name it.
Yeah, and we're not just talking like simple tweaks anymore, right?
Yeah.
Remember, early nudges, they focused on pretty straightforward things like, changing where stuff was placed in a cafeteria to get people to choose the healthy options. But now, it's about applying these insights to redesign whole programs and systems.
You got it. Remember that classic example with organ donation and just switching to an opt-out system? It turns out just increasing registration. Well, it didn't always mean more organ transplants actually happened.
Oh, really? So just changing the default, isn't a sure win.
Right. So in Ontario, Canada, they found the real problem was getting families to agree. Even if someone was registered, their family could still say no.
Wow, so they had to go deeper, huh? Understand the whole process, not just that first choice. So what do they do about it?
Well, they started sending out these conversation starter cards, encouraged families to talk about, their wishes for organ donation beforehand. It's a great example of how getting that deeper understanding of the behavior can lead to way more effective nudges.
This makes me think, nudging is sometimes seen as this simple trick, almost manipulative. But it sounds like it actually needs way more thought, real expertise.
Oh, absolutely. It's not about finding this magic nudge button that works for everything. You have to really get what behavior you're trying to change, what's stopping people, all the psychology involved. It's complex.
Makes me think about that study with smiley faces on electricity bills. Didn't they find something kind of surprising there?
Oh, yeah, that's a classic. Shows how even tiny details, they can make a huge difference. So researchers were trying to figure out how to get people to save energy, right? And they found that showing people how their energy use stacked up against their neighbors, social comparison, it actually worked, especially for those using a lot of energy.
Yeah, makes sense. Nobody wants to be the energy hog of the neighborhood.
Right. But here's the thing. For those already using less energy, seeing they were doing better, it actually made them use more energy.
Wait, seriously? Why would seeing they were doing good make them use more?
That's the crazy thing about psychology, right? Maybe they felt like they had some wiggle room now, or maybe they were subconsciously trying to match the average. Who knows? But whatever the reason, it shows you got to design and test these things carefully.
And that's where those smiley faces come in.
Exactly. When they added a simple smiley face on the bills of those who were already using less, just praising their efficiency, it totally reinforced that good behavior, kept their energy use down.
So a tiny little visual cue changed the whole outcome. Wild.
See, nudging isn't about tricking people. It's about figuring out how our brains work and designing choices in a way that kind of works with our natural tendencies.
Which brings us to behavioral economics, right? That whole idea that we humans, well, we're not always the rational decision makers we like to think we are.
Yeah, we got all these biases and quirks that mess with our choices, often in ways that don't make logical sense. Nudging is about, working with those quirks, not against them.
Okay, so how does this predictable irrationality thing play out in real life? Give me an example.
Okay, think about loss aversion. Studies have shown that the pain of losing, let's say, $50 is psychologically stronger than the pleasure of gaining $50.
So we feel the sting of a loss more intensely than the joy of a win.
Exactly. And you can use this to design really powerful nudges. Instead of saying, hey, look how much money you'll save by investing, you could say, think about how much you'll lose if you don't invest.
Ah, so you're hitting that fear of loss button to get people moving.
Exactly. Another one is default bias. We tend to stick with the pre-selected options even when other choices might be better.
Oh, like when I set up a new app and just go with those standard settings without even checking the other options.
Perfect example. That's why automatic enrollment in retirement plans is such a powerful nudge. It basically makes opting out of saving harder than opting in. Studies show it really boosts participation.
So it's like we're kind of hacking our own brains by using these insights to help ourselves.
That's a great way to put it. But like any powerful tool, there are ethical questions. Some people say nudging, especially by governments, is a bit paternalistic.
It does raise questions, right? Like who gets to decide what the right choice is?
Exactly. That's why being transparent and open about it is so important. But the cool thing is, nudging is evolving to address these concerns too.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Tell me more about how that's happening.
We were just talking about like the ethical side of nudging and how it's changing, right? Well, one of the coolest things coming up is this idea of personalized nudges.
Personalized nudges. Okay, now that sounds really interesting. So how does that work?
Okay, imagine this. You're trying to decide when to take your Social Security benefits. Everyone says delaying it is the best way to get more money, right?
Yeah, but I've heard that there might be good reasons to take it early too, depending on your situation.
Exactly. Things like your health, your family history, even just your finances, it all matters. So a one-size-fits-all nudge just won't work.
So how do you personalize a nudge for something as, complicated as retirement planning?
Well, our source talks about this researcher, Eric Johnson. He's building systems that tailor nudges to each person based on their own stuff. Imagine like a system that looks at all your personal data and then gives you advice that's just for you.
So instead of just saying delay Social Security, it might say, hey, based on your health and how long you might live, taking it early could be better for you.
Yeah, exactly. And this personalized approach could be huge in other areas too, like healthcare. Think about a system that nudges people toward health plans that actually fit their needs and their risk tolerance instead of just dumping everyone into the same generic plan.
That would be amazing, especially with health insurance. It's so confusing. Okay, so we've gone from nudging individuals to personalizing those nudges. Where do we go from here?
Well, now let's zoom out even more. Let's talk about using these behavioral insights, but for entire systems, not just individual choices, but nudging the structures themselves, the stuff that shapes our lives.
Whoa. Okay, my mind is officially blown. Nudging systems. What does that even look like? Give me an example.
Well, let's look at Colombia. They had this issue with their telecom regulations. The contracts were so complicated that most people couldn't understand them, which led to, lots of confusion and people making bad choices.
Oh, yeah. I've definitely felt that overwhelm with phone contracts before.
Right. Well, Colombia said, let's use behavioral insights to fix this. They simplified those contracts, made them way easier to understand and compare.
So they nudged the system itself to be more user-friendly? That's cool. Did it work?
Big time. The time it took to read a contract went from over 6 hours down to 12 minutes.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
Yeah.
I bet people felt a lot more in control actually making good decisions about their phone plans.
Exactly. It shows how this experimental mindset that's at the core of nudging can be applied much more broadly. It's about using evidence and testing to design systems that work better for everyone.
This all sounds really promising, but I'm also curious about the potential downsides. Is there a risk that nudging, especially on a system level, could be used to manipulate people or push them toward choices that aren't really good for them?
It's a fair point, and it's something ethicists and, policymakers are thinking hard about as the field grows. Transparency is key. People need to know nudges are being used and understand why.
Makes sense. If you're going to influence people's behavior, they should know what's happening.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember, nudging should never be about forcing people or taking away their choices. It's about presenting those options in a way that helps people make choices that match their own goals and values,
So more about giving them the tools to make good choices, not telling them what those choices should be.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where this experimental approach is so valuable. You test different nudges, gather data, and constantly tweak your approach to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to without any nasty surprises.
This reminds me of that day of failure thing we talked about earlier. Didn't Finland do something like that?
They did. It's a fascinating example of some governments embracing this experimental mindset. So in Finland, they have an official, get this, International Day of Failure to celebrate the importance of learning from our mistakes.
Wait, a whole day dedicated to celebrating failure. Tell me more. It sounds, counterintuitive, but also kind of brilliant.
It's all about changing how we see failure, not as something bad or shameful, but it's a crucial part of learning.
So instead of being afraid to try new things, you embrace the chance of failing as a way to learn and get better.
Exactly. And that's so important when you're tackling really tough problems, right? Not every solution is going to work perfectly the first time, and that's okay. What matters is learning from those setbacks and keeping trying.
This whole idea of experimenting and learning from failure, it really resonates with me. It seems like a much better way to solve problems than just sticking to like rigid ideas or old ways of doing things.
I agree. And that's a big part of what makes nudging so interesting, right? It's not about having all the answers already. It's about being open to testing, adapting, always trying to improve.
Okay, we've covered a lot here. We talked about personalized nudges, nudging whole systems, and even the importance of experimenting and learning from failure. So what's next on our nudging journey?
Well, before we wrap up, we got to talk about one last thing, maybe the most important, the potential of nudging to tackle some of the biggest challenges facing our world.
So using nudges to address things like poverty, climate change, inequality. Now that's what I'm talking about. Let's dive in. Okay, we're back and ready for the last part of our deep dive into this world of nudges. We've seen how they can shape individual choices, get personalized, even reshape whole systems.
Right. And now, well, we get to the really exciting part, using these nudges to try and tackle those huge challenges, the ones facing all of us.
Because it's one thing to nudge someone towards a healthier snack, but can these same ideas really help with things like, I don't know, poverty or climate change?
It sounds ambitious, but there's more and more evidence that they can. Our source highlights this group, the Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab, JPL for short. They've been doing these really rigorous field experiments all over the world, testing different ways to fight poverty.
Okay, so real-world stuff, not just theories. I like that. So what have they found?
One study looked at small farmers in Kenya. A lot of them can't afford fertilizer, so their crops don't grow as well, and it keeps them stuck in poverty.
Yeah, fertilizer can be expensive, especially if you're already struggling.
Exactly. So JPAL tried a simple nudge. They let farmers buy fertilizer ahead of time at harvest when they had more money.
So instead of paying up front, they could pay later when they'd actually have the cash. Clever. Did it work?
It did. Fertilizer use went up a lot, leading to bigger harvests and, more money for those farmers.
That's amazing. A small change, a nudge, and it makes a real difference.
Right. And it's not just about money. Another JPAL study looked at getting people to chlorinate their water in villages, to prevent those waterborne illnesses.
I bet just giving people chlorine tablets isn't enough, right? You have to make it easy and convenient for them to actually use them.
Exactly. So they put these bright yellow chlorine dispensers right at those communal wells.
So it's right there when they get water. A visual reminder, plus maybe some social pressure too, seeing your neighbors do it.
You got it. And it worked. Chlorination rates went way up. Way fewer people getting sick.
Fantastic. So nudges are helping with poverty, public health. What other big problems are they tackling?
Well, climate change is a huge one. There are tons of nudges being tested to encourage people to be more sustainable,
Like those energy reports that compare your use to your neighbors. I gotta admit, those get me a little competitive. Don't want to be the one using the most energy.
The power of social norms. And it's not just individuals. Think about cities. They can be designed to make walking, cycling, using public transit easier and more attractive.
So more bike lanes, pedestrian-friendly streets, good public transit systems. You're basically nudging people towards those greener options, right?
Exactly. It's about creating an environment where those good behaviors are just the easiest and most appealing choices. And it's not just the physical stuff. Nudges can encourage people to conserve energy at home, waste less, buy eco-friendly products.
This is really inspiring. It sounds like nudges could play a big role in building a better future, more sustainable, more equitable. But let's be real, our source does talk about some potential problems, right?
Of course, we got to be realistic. Nudges aren't magic. They need to be designed carefully, tested rigorously, and you got to understand the whole context.
And we can't forget those ethical questions. We talked about transparency, but what about unintended consequences?
You're right. You always got to be watching and evaluating, making sure those nudges are working as intended, no nasty surprises.
This whole deep dive has given me so much to think about. I'm seeing nudges everywhere now, and I'm really starting to get how powerful they can be, both for good and bad.
I think that's the big takeaway here. Nudges are powerful tools, but just tools. It's on us to use them wisely, ethically.
Couldn't have said it better. So, to wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. Now that you've gotten this glimpse into the world of nudges, where do you see them in your own life?
And how can you use what you've learned to make better choices, not just for yourself, but for your community, for the world?
Thanks for joining us on this journey exploring nudges. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep nudging the world in a positive direction.